Hi designers, Sam I Am here, and today I'll walk you through some context on documenting design tokens and how to set up your Figma files to automate the process using Tokens Studio and Automator. The goal is to create living documentation of our design tokens, so when our design decisions change, our documentation changes automagically. So what do I mean by living documentation? Well, living, as an expression, means once it's created or brought to life, it can continue to grow or change or stay alive with just a little bit of love. Kind of like a houseplant that just needs a little bit of water to keep on growing. In this case, living documentation means when we create our design token docs, whenever we update our design decisions and update the tokens, our documentation will automagically change with just a couple of clicks. So when you include living documentation in your workflow, it saves a ton of time keeping things up to date. It's 2024. Anybody got time for static docs that require me to manually update things? I just won't do it. Now, lucky for us, Tokens Studio has some features that can create both static and living documentation right in Figma. These are helpful to understand before I show you how to automate the whole process end to end using the Automator plugin with Tokens Studio. I'm in Figma and I want to create some documentation for the new logo that I've created. And the first thing I'm going to do is open up the Tokens Studio plugin. So I'm going to hit Command P or Control P to get the command bar line, and I'm going to type in Tokens Studio if it's not already there. And sure, looks like I've been making some changes. First, I want to show you the static documentation option. So with my layer selected, I go over to the Inspect panel, and I hit this tiny little eye here for Debug and Annotate. And now you see I have this add to annotation. And depending on which arrow I choose is which direction the annotation is going to appear. So I'm just going to go over to this side. And this is pretty cool. It tells me the name of the item that I'm looking at here, which is my component, and all the things that are within the layer that I've selected. Now, the unfortunate thing about this is it's layer by layer. So if I wanted to go in and grab for this, there's no tokens on there, unfortunately. But if there was, I would have to do like layer by layer and then go, down and create more documentation there. So that's not really helpful. Also, the annotation feature is not living. So if this changes, like let's say the name changes, for example, it's not going to show up here. This is just static documentation that is a snapshot in time. And it also doesn't show me the value of the token or where the design decisions came from. Like if this blue color is a reference to something else, I want to know that. So it's not super helpful to me. And honestly, there are some tools that do this better. I'm talking about Eightshapes Specs. If you haven't tried it, I'll give you a quick little demo. This was not the purpose of this, but I'm going to go over into Eightshapes Specs. I do have the paid version of this tool. I'm just going to add some quick little settings here and run it. Maybe I'll do a demo on this later, but you can see that already I have the name of the token as well as the value here, which is pretty cool. Not the references, but the value. I have like an annotated version. It shows me like different variations of my logo. And it also can do, some markup and some other things. So if I just want to create a snapshot, I'd rather use a tool like this because it gives me all the layers in one go, also tells me more about the properties, and there's a whole bunch of other settings in there that you can mess around with that make this super, super powerful. So I'm not convinced that the annotation feature is the best way to produce static documentation, but it is there. Let's create some living documentation in Tokens Studio. So I'm in my soon-to-be released Tailwind 2024 community file where I'm going to give all of the primitives for Tailwind to the community as tokens and variables. It's been a few months of a labor of love to get this thing up and running. It's almost ready for you. Just some engineer testing still happening, but let's create a color swatch. Okay, so I'm going to open up the Tokens Studio plugin. You can use the keyboard shortcuts, or if you're, the kind of person that wants to go to the menus, it's this guy up here. You could search Token Studio. I have ran it recently, so it's there. Or you can use that Command P shortcut again. And I want to document some colors, so I'm going to go into my colors primitives here, and there's a lot of colors. Let's pick a pretty purple color, okay? And in this template, I want to see the color. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tap to fill. All right, I'm working on 500 here. I'm going to go into this text layer, and I'm going to go back over to Purple 500. I'm going to right click, Documentation Tokens, and I'm going to go Name. And you can see now that it's overwritten the name. And this one here, my raw value, I'm going to select that. It's the same as the hex code because there's no reference here, and I want to go value here. It's giving me the hex code again. So at a primitive level, I probably wouldn't need this layer. I could just go into my template and I could hide it. Okay, so now I have a swatch with a name and the value, which is perfect. Now, what happens if this name changes? All right, so let's go into edit the token. I'm just gonna change this name briefly, save. I'm gonna run this on the page level here, because I did a name change, and I'm gonna change this back to apply to selection because I want to update this token now, right? So watch what happens if I hit apply to selection. The name has changed. So you can create living documentation in Tokens Studio using the documentation tokens feature, right? So this right click documentations tokens here. Let me just go in and fix that name before I forget. And I'll update this again. And we're back at my original, which is awesome. So this is an interesting feature. It works if you want to just make a few things manually. But if you're documenting a file as big as this one, it would take a tremendous amount of time to create every swatch individually. And I don't know if that's something that I really want to invest in. And so this is where using the Automator script with Token Studio comes in super handy. To automate the process of creating living documentation with Token Studio, we can use the Automator plugin for Figma. Automator allows you to build automation scripts. So basically anything you can do in Figma as a repetitive task, like filling a color swatch and then adding a documentation token for the name and the value like we just did, could be done by Automator instead. Automator used to be owned by a company called Diagram, which was bought out by Figma, and so now anyone can use Automator for free, which is awesome because I used to pay like $100 a year to have access to it just to do this thing. It's the only thing I know how to do with it. Now don't worry, you don't have to write an Automator script. I have no idea how to do that. Jan Six, the creator of Token Studio, wrote the Automator script for the community a few years back, and I've modified it slightly. And I've collaborated with him to publish the 2024 version. This script tells Automator to look at the template that we've created, which we're going to do next, with specific named layers, which map back to token properties, like the token name and the value, or even filling that color swatch like we just did. We tell Automator which token set we want to document, like my Tailwind colors, and it duplicates our template for each token in the set, all of them at one time. And it attaches those specifically named layers to the token properties. So when we run Token Studio, the templates are populated with the most current token data. Whew, that was a big mouthful. So now that I've covered some of the basic context about automating living documentation versus static documentation and what Automator is, let's do the technical setup for Automator so that's done, and then we can prep our templates to work with it. Now, if you're familiar with adding plugins to Figma, this part will be easy. First thing you want to do is go to the Figma community and look for Automator. You can filter by plugins to make it a little easier to find, and click on the name Automator. Now, if you hit this little save button here, it automatically saves the plugin to your Figma account. Next, we have to download the script, and I'll post the link to that in the description below so it's easier for you to find. Basically, you click the link, download the file, and save it somewhere where you can find it easily. Now we want to add our Automator script to the Automator plugin. So first thing you want to do is open up the Automator plugin. Then you're going to navigate to the settings, which is this little icon up at the top, and hit Import from JSON. Find the file that you saved, click it, and hit Open. I'm on a Mac, yours might look a little different. Hit the edit icon, choose a color that you like, and maybe change the naming a little bit. Whatever you put before the slash is what shows up in the heading of the script. The Automator script works with text layers and frame layers in Figma. Text layers we're primarily going to use for written documentation of the token properties, like the name and the value and the description, just like we did in the color swatch example earlier. Frame layers we'll use to create a visual preview of our token properties, like when we filled the frame of our color swatch earlier in the example. It's really important that you type your token names exactly as they are here. If you add an extra space, or you capitalize them differently, or you don't have the double underscore in front of the name, it won't work. So, to save you the 2 years of frustration that I went through trying to figure this out, you can use my examples to copy and paste the names into your own templates. You can use my templates, which work, or you can check out the article that I wrote, which explains all of the different named layers that I've come across to use and explore, and I'll drop the link to that below. Create your templates however you like. Just keep in mind that the script can only apply one property per layer. So if you want to show a visual preview of a color token, that can also be applied to a container background, a stroke or a border, as well as a text layer, you're going to have to create a layer for each one of those in your template. My suggestion is you create one template that has layers for all the things that you might want to show in a token, regardless of what kind of token it is. You could choose to have a layer in there to show a token for border radii, or even the visual representation of the size of something. I like to have different kinds of templates for different kinds of tokens, as well as different audiences in my files. Marketing and content designers usually like these more visual documentation types, and people working in design systems and collaborating with engineers typically are fine with just a long list of token names and their values. When you're happy with your templates, you might want to turn them into components and take advantage of component properties. Component properties will allow us to edit all of our living documentation in one shot. Like, for example, if there is no description for my token, I might want to hide that layer. Component properties allow me to do that in one click. All right, we have templates that we like, they're named properly, and we're ready to test using them in Automator to create some living documentation of our design tokens in Tokens Studio. So the first step in the Automator flow is to tell Automator which token set we want to create the living documentation for using our template. However, it's not always easy to get the token set name right, especially if you're using a folder system within your tokens in Tokens Studio. And when things go wrong, Automator won't tell you how to fix it because there's no error messages. How do you get the set name from Tokens Studio? Well, first, open the plugin, and then look for the token set in the left-hand menu that you want to document. And if this is the first time you're testing your flow, work on a small token set. When you find the set name, right-click on it and select Rename from the menu. Highlight the full token set name from the input field and copy it. You can use Command or Control C on your keyboard or right-click and hit copy. Exit out of the menu completely and paste that name somewhere for easy reference. I like to use sticky notes because they're right in the file there with me, but you could use a text layer or even a notepad on your computer. Then you're ready to run the full Automator script. Now that we have our token set name copied from Tokens Studio, we want to make sure that we have an instance of our template handy. If you were using a component, make sure that you grab an instance of the component and you're not running the script directly on the component itself. Open the Automator plugin. Select the script that you want to run and paste the set name that you copied into the input. And if for some reason it didn't paste, go copy it again from wherever you wrote it down and paste it in there. But then make sure that you go and select your template before you select Done. This next screen about the token name starts with, you can leave that empty. When you leave it empty, it writes templates for all of the tokens in your set. Then you select Done and wait for Automator to work its magic. What Automator is doing here is duplicating the template for every token in the token set and then matching the names of the layers to the token properties of the tokens in the set. However, where did those templates go? Sometimes you have to search around a little bit to find where Automator put those template duplicates. You might have to zoom out of your Figma canvas to find it, and you're looking for this long white frame. If you have a lot of stuff in your file, it might be really hard to find the Automator output that way. So if you look at your left-hand menu, the layers list in Figma, you're looking for a frame called Frames sitting at the top of your layers list because it was the last thing that was added to the canvas. Now, as a troubleshooting tip, if you find the Automator frame and it's empty with no templates in it, looks like a little tiny square even, start the steps over again. Make sure that your template is selected before you run the script and that your token set name is copy and pasted from Tokens Studio without any spaces. If you see the frame empty as a little tiny square box, it did not work properly. So when you find the Automator output of frames and you see all the templates in there, you might be wondering or noticing that they're just duplicates of the templates without any data in them. And that's because we now have to run Tokens Studio to populate the tokens with the most recent data. So to do that, select the frame output by Automator and open the Tokens Studio plugin. Make sure that the set name that you ran the automation script for is active. You're going to notice a check mark next to the set name when it's active. Configure the bottom button of the plugin to say Apply to Selection if it isn't already. Select the button to apply the token data. I think it's interesting to notice here that there's a node counter up at the top of Tokens Studio that tells you how many nodes or token properties it's scanning for and trying to apply. The number can add up quite quickly. Once it's done, go through and inspect your work. If any parts of your template didn't populate as expected, go back to the Rename Your Layer section and take a look at how you named your layers. I'm willing to guarantee that you have a typo, a space, or something isn't quite right so that the named layer couldn't match a token property in Tokens Studio. Now that we have our templates populated with data from Tokens Studio, it's time to clean them up a little bit. The order in which the templates are created from the Automator script is still kind of a mystery to me. So you'll want to spend some time organizing your living documentation file. You'll notice that the templates have been renamed to match the token name, which is handy, but you still have to group them, organize them, move them around, put them in different frames, maybe even create some different documentation around them. You'll also notice that sometimes the documentation template you created doesn't quite work with the data from your tokens, which is kind of a classic content design problem. In my experience, tokens with a lot of data in them, like typography tokens, or if I've used a math equation to calculate a sizing scale, those layers usually need some love when it comes to the alignment and the auto layout properties. Also, if you have spots in your template for properties that don't exist for that token, for example, I didn't put a description in the token, I now might want to go and hide that layer. And again, if I'm using component properties, this becomes pretty easy. Just as a side note, if you didn't use component properties and now you're wishing that you had, you can still go back to your component and add component properties and then go back over to your living documentation and use them. It's not too late. So now that we have living documentation of our design tokens, you're probably wondering how to keep them alive. It's really not that difficult. All you do is go to wherever your living documentation is in your Figma file, select it, make sure that the token set that you change the tokens in is active with the check mark, and push the button, Apply to Selection. That populates the data which we've mapped to these tokens in your templates with the latest data from Tokens Studio. We did it, friends! We covered a lot today. In part 1, I talked about the documentation problem we're trying to solve. We went over what living documentation is and how the Annotations feature in Tokens Studio is static doc, and the documentation tokens are living docs. We went over what Automator is and how to download the plugin as well as the script and get the script set up in the Automator plugin. We went over the specs on how to create templates that could be used with the Automator script, including how to rename the layers, which is the most important part. I showed some examples from some community files that I have on different ways that you can do visual previews versus written documentation, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And we talked about considering using component properties as a way to supercharge that workflow. In part 2, we went over how to actually create the living documentation using the Automator plugin. And that involves some steps like copy and pasting the set name from Tokens Studio before you run the Automator script. You want to make sure that that template is selected before you run the script, and that if you are using a template component, that you're using an instance of the component. After Automator duplicates your template, we have to go back into Tokens Studio to populate it with data, and then you have to clean up your templates. Once your token docs are living, it's pretty easy to keep them alive. Go to wherever they live, select them, open up Tokens Studio, and apply whatever your new decisions are that you've captured in your tokens to the living docs that you've selected. I hope you found this helpful. If you get stuck or have questions, or if you have some pro tips of your own to share, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Or come find me in the Tokens Studio Slack community so we can help each other out. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.